The theoretical and practical struggle against unity through domination or unity through incorporation, ironically, not only undermines the justifications for patriarchy, colonialism, humanism, positivism, essentialism, scientism, and other unlamented isms, but all claims for an organic or natural standpoint. I think that radical and socialist Marxist feminisms have also undermined our own epistemological strategies, and that this is a crucially valuable step in imagining possible unities. It remains to be seen whether all epistemologies, as Western political people have known them, fail us in the task to build effective affinities. It is important to note that the effort to construct revolutionary standpoints, epistemologies, as achievements of people committed to changing the world, has been part of the process showing the limits of identification. The acid tools of postmodernist theory and the constructive tools of ontological discourse about revolutionary subjects might be seen as ironic allies in dissolving Western selves in the interests of survival. We are excruciatingly conscious of what it means to have a historically constituted body, but with the loss of innocence in our origin, there is no expulsion from the garden either. Our politics lose the indulgence of guilt with the naivety of innocence. But what would another political myth for socialist feminism look like? What kind of politics could embrace partial, contradictory, permanently unclosed constructions of personal and collective selves, and still be faithful, effective, and ironically, socialist feminist? I do not know of any other time in history when there was greater need for political unity to confront effectively the dominations of race, gender, sexuality, and class. I also do not know of any other time when the kind of unity we might help build could have been possible. None of us have any longer the symbolic or material capability of dictating the shape of reality to any of them, or at least we cannot claim innocence from practicing such dominations. White women, including socialist feminists, discovered, i.e. were forced kicking and screaming to notice, the non-innocence of the category woman. That consciousness changes the geography of all previous categories. It denatures them as heat denatures a fragile protein. Cyborg feminists have to argue that we do not want any more natural matrix of unity and that no construction is whole. Innocence and the corollary insistence on victimhood as the only ground for insight has done enough damage. But the constructed revolutionary subject must give late 20th century people pause as well. In the fraying of identities and in the reflexive strategies for constructing them, the possibility opens up for weaving something other than a shroud for the day after the apocalypse that so prophetically ends salvation history. Both Marxist, socialist feminists, and radical feminisms have simultaneously naturalized and denatured the category woman and consciousness of the social lives of women. Perhaps a schematic caricature can highlight both kinds of moves. Marxian socialism is rooted in an analysis of wage labor, which reveals class structure. The consequence of the wage relationship is systematic alienation, as the worker is dissociated from his product. Abstraction and illusion rule in knowledge. Domination rules in practice. Labor is the preeminently privileged category, enabling the Marxists to overcome illusion and find that point of view which is necessary for changing the world. Labor is the humanizing activity that makes man. Labor is an ontological category permitting the knowledge of a subject, and so the knowledge of subjugation and alienation. In faithful filiation, socialist feminism advanced by allying itself with the basic analytic strategies of Marxism. The main achievement of both Marxist feminists and socialist feminists was to expand the category of labor to accommodate what some women did, even when the wage relation was subordinated to a more comprehensive view of labor under capitalist patriarchy. In particular, women's labor in the household and women's activity as mothers generally, i.e., reproduction in the socialist feminist sense, entered theory on the authority of analogy to the Marxian concept of labor. The unity of women here rests on an epistemology based on the ontological structure of labor. Marxist socialist feminism does not naturalize unity. It is a possible achievement based on a possible standpoint rooted in social relations. The essentializing move is in the ontological structure of labor, or of its analog, women's activity. The central role of object relations versions of psychoanalysis and related strong universalizing moves in discussing reproduction, caring work, and mothering in many approaches to epistemology underline the author's resistance to what I am calling postmodernism. For me, both the universalizing moves and the versions of psychoanalysis make analysis of women's place in the integrated circuit difficult and lead to systematic difficulties in accounting for or even seeing major aspects of the construction of gender and gendered social life. The inheritance of Marxian humanism, with its preeminently Western self, is the difficulty for me. The contribution from these formulations has been the emphasis on the daily responsibility of real women to build unities rather than to naturalize them. Catherine MacKinnon's version of radical feminism is itself a caricature of the appropriating, incorporating, totalizing tendencies of Western theories of identity grounding action. It is factually and politically wrong to assimilate all of the diverse moments or conversations in recent women's politics named radical feminism to MacKinnon's version. But the teleological logic of her theory shows how an epistemology and ontology, including their negations, erase or police difference. Only one of the effects of MacKinnon's theory is the rewriting of the history of the polymorphous field called radical feminism. The major effect is the production of a theory of experience, of women's identity, that is a kind of apocalypse for all revolutionary standpoints. That is, the totalization built into this tale of radical feminism achieves its end, the unity of women, by enforcing the experience of and testimony to radical non-being. As for the Marxist socialist feminists, consciousness is an achievement, not a natural fact, and MacKinnon's theory eliminates some of the difficulties built into humanist revolutionary subjects, but at the cost of radical reductionism. MacKinnon argues that radical feminism necessarily adopted a different analytical strategy from Marxism, looking first not at the structure of class, but at the structure of sex-gender and its generative relationship, men's constitution and appropriation of women sexually. Ironically, MacKinnon's ontology constructs a non-subject, a non-being. Another's desire, not the self's labor, is the origin of woman. She therefore develops a theory of consciousness that enforces what can count as women's experience, anything that names sexual violation, indeed, sex itself, as far as women can be concerned. Feminist practice is the construction of this form of consciousness, i.e., the self-knowledge of a self who is not. Perversely, sexual appropriation in this radical feminism still has the epistemological status of labor, i.e., the point from which analysis able to contribute to changing the world must flow. But sexual objectification, not alienation, is the consequence of the structure of sex-gender. In the realm of knowledge, the result of sexual objectification is illusion and abstraction. However, A woman is not simply alienated from her product, but in a deep sense, does not exist as a subject or even potential subject, since she owes her existence as a woman to sexual appropriation. To be constituted by another's desire is not the same thing as to be alienated in the violent separation of the laborer from his product. McKinnon's radical theory of experience is totalizing in the extreme. It does not so much marginalize as obliterate the authority of any other women's political speech and action. It is a totalization producing what Western patriarchy itself never succeeded in doing: feminist consciousness of the non-existence of women except as products of men's desire. I think McKinnon correctly argues that no Marxian version of identity can firmly ground women's unity. But in solving the problem of these contradictions of any Western revolutionary subject for feminist purposes, she develops an even more authoritarian doctrine of experience. If my complaint about socialist Marxian standpoints is their unintended erasure of polyvocal, unassimilable, radical difference made visible in anti-colonial discourse and practice, McKinnon's intentional erasure of all difference through the device of the essential non-existence of women is not reassuring. In my taxonomy, which like any other taxonomy is a reinscription of history, radical feminism can accommodate all the activities of women named by social feminists as forms of labor only if the activity can somehow be sexualized. Reproduction had different tones of meaning for the two tendencies, one rooted in labor, one in sex, both calling the consequences of domination and ignorance of social and personal reality false consciousness. Beyond either the difficulties or the contributions in the argument of any one author, neither Marxist nor radical feminist points of view have tended to embrace the status of a partial explanation. Both were regularly constituted as totalities. Western explanation has demanded as much. How else could the Western author incorporate its others? Each tried to annex other forms of domination by expanding its basic categories through analogy, simple listing, or addition. Embarrassed silence about race among white radical and socialist feminists was one major, devastating political consequence. History and polyvocality disappear into political taxonomies that try to establish genealogies. There was no structural room for race, or for much else, in theory claiming to reveal the construction of the category woman and social group women as a unified or totalizable whole. The structure of my character looks like this: socialist feminism, structure of class, wage labor, alienation, labor, by analogy reproduction, by extension sex, by addition race. Radical feminism, structure of gender, sexual appropriation, objectification, sex by analogy labor, by extension reproduction, by addition race. In another context, the French theorist Julia Kristeva claimed women appeared as a historical group after World War II, along with groups like youth. Her dates are doubtful, but we are now accustomed to remembering that as objects of knowledge and as historical actors, race did not always exist. Class has a historical genesis, and homosexuals are quite junior. It is no accident that the symbolic system of the family of man, and so the essence of woman, breaks up at the same moment that networks of connection among people on the planet are unprecedentedly multiple, pregnant, and complex. Advanced capitalism is inadequate to convey the structure of this historical moment. In the Western sense, the end of man is at stake. It is no accident that woman disintegrates into women in our time. Perhaps socialist feminists were not substantially guilty of producing essentialist theory that suppressed women's particularity and contradictory interests. I think we have been, at least through unreflective participation in the logics, languages, and practices of white humanism, and through searching for a single ground of domination to secure our revolutionary voice. Now we have less excuse. But in the consciousness of our failures, we risk relapsing into boundless difference and giving up on the confusing task of making partial, real connection. Some differences are playful. Some are poles of world historical systems of domination. Epistemology is about knowing the difference. The informatics of domination. In this attempt at an epistemological and political position, I would like to sketch a picture of possible unity, a picture indebted to socialist and feminist principles of design. The frame for my sketch is set by the extent and importance of rearrangements in worldwide social relations tied to science and technology. I argue for a politics rooted in claims about fundamental changes in the nature of class, race, and gender in an emerging system of world order analogous in its novelty and scope to that created by industrial capitalism. We are living through a movement from an organic industrial society to a polymorphous informational system, from all work to all play, a deadly game. Simultaneously material and ideological, the dichotomies may be expressed in the following chart of transitions from the comfortable old hierarchical dominations to the scary new networks I have called the informatics of domination. Representation, simulation, bourgeois novel, realism, science fiction, postmodernism, organism, biotic component, depth, integrity, surface, boundary, heat, noise, biology as clinical practice, biology as inscription, physiology, communications engineering, small group, subsystem, perfection, optimization, eugenics, population control, decadence, magic mountain, obsolescence, future shock, hygiene, stress management, microbiology, tuberculosis, immunology, AIDS, organic division of labor, ergonomics, cybernetics of labor, functional specialization, modular construction, reproduction, replication, organic sex role specialization, optimal genetic strategies, biological determinism, evolutionary inertia, constraints, community ecology, ecosystem, racial chain of being, neo-imperialism, United Nations humanism, scientific management in home, factory, global factory, electronic cottage, family, market, factory, women in the integrated circuit, family wage, comparable worth, public, private, cyborg citizenship, nature, culture, fields of difference, cooperation, communications enhancement, Freud, Lacan, sex, genetic engineering, labor, robotics, mind, artificial intelligence, World War II, Star Wars, white capitalist patriarchy, informatics of domination. This list suggests several interesting things. First, the objects on the right-hand side cannot be coded as natural. a realization that subverts naturalistic coding for the left-hand side as well. We cannot go back ideologically or materially. It's not just that God is dead, so is the goddess. In relation to objects like biotic components, one must think not in terms of essential properties, but in terms of strategies of design, boundary constraints, rates of flows, systems logics, costs of lowering constraints. Sexual reproduction is one kind of reproductive strategy among many, with costs and benefits as a function of the system environment. Ideologies of sexual reproduction can no longer reasonably call on the notions of sex and sex role as organic aspects in natural objects like organisms and families. Such reasoning will be unmasked as irrational and ironically incorporate executives reading Playboy and anti-porn radical feminists will make strange bedfellows in jointly unmasking the irrationalism. Likewise for race, ideologies about human diversity have to be formulated in terms of frequencies of parameters like blood groups or intelligence scores. It is irrational to invoke concepts like primitive and civilized. For liberals and radicals, the search for integrated social systems gives way to a new practice called experimental ethnography, in which an organic object dissipates in attention to the play of writing. At the level of ideology, we see translations of racism and colonialism into languages of development and underdevelopment, rates and constraints of modernization. Any objects or persons can be reasonably thought of in terms of disassembly and reassembly. No natural architectures constrain system design. The financial districts in all the world's cities, as well as the export processing and free trade zones, proclaim this elementary fact of late capitalism. The entire universe of objects that can be known scientifically must be formulated as problems in communications engineering for the managers, or as theories of the text for those who would resist. Both are cyborg semiologies. One should expect control strategies to concentrate on boundary conditions and interfaces, on rates of flow across boundaries, and not on the integrity of natural objects. Integrity or sincerity of the Western self gives way to decision procedures and expert systems. For example, control strategies applied to women's capacities to give birth to new human beings will be developed in the languages of population control and maximization of goal achievement for individual decision makers. Control strategies will be formulated in terms of rates, costs of constraints, degrees of freedom. Human beings, like any other component or subsystem, must be localized in a system architecture whose basic modes of operation are probabilistic, statistical. No objects, spaces, or bodies are sacred in themselves. Any component can be interfaced with any other if the proper standard, the proper code, can be constructed for processing signals in a common language. Exchange in this world transcends the universal translation effected by capitalist markets that Marx analyzed so well. The privileged pathology affecting all kinds of components in this universe is stress, communications breakdown. The cyborg is not subject to Foucault's biopolitics. The cyborg simulates politics as a much more potent field of operations. This kind of analysis of scientific and cultural objects of knowledge, which have appeared historically since World War II, prepares us to notice some important inadequacies in feminist analysis, which has proceeded as if the organic, hierarchical dualisms ordering discourse in the West, since Aristotle still ruled. They have been cannibalized, or as Zoe Sophia Sophoulis might put it, they have been techno-digested. The dichotomies between mind and body, animal and human, organism and machine, public and private, nature and culture, men and women, primitive and civilized, are all in question ideologically. The actual situation of women is their integration, exploitation into a world system of production, reproduction, and communication called the informatics of domination. The home, workplace, market, public arena, the body itself, all can be dispersed and interfaced in nearly infinite, polymorphous ways, with large consequences for women and others, consequences that themselves are very different for different people, and which make potent oppositional international movements difficult to imagine and essential for survival. One important route for reconstructing socialist feminist politics is through theory and practice addressed to the social relations of science and technology, including, crucially, the systems of myth and meaning structuring our imaginations. The cyborg is a kind of disassembled and reassembled postmodern collective and personal self. This is the self feminists must code. Communications technologies and biotechnologies are the crucial tools recrafting our bodies. These tools embody and enforce new social relations for women worldwide. Technologies and scientific discourses can be partially understood as formalizations, i.e., as frozen moments, of the fluid social interactions constituting them, but they should also be viewed as instruments for enforcing meanings. The boundary is permeable between tool and myth, instrument and concept, historical systems of social relations, and historical anatomies of possible bodies, including objects of knowledge. Indeed, myth and tool mutually constitute each other. Furthermore, communications, sciences, and modern biologies are constructed by a common move, the translation of the world into a problem of coding, a search for a common language in which all resistance to instrumental control disappears and all heterogeneity can be submitted to disassembly, reassembly, investment, and exchange. In communication sciences, the translation of the world into a problem in coding can be illustrated by looking at cybernetic, feedback-controlled systems theories applied to telephone technology, computer design, weapons deployment, or database construction and maintenance. In each case, solution to the key questions rests on a theory of language and control. The key operation is determining the rates, directions, and probabilities of flow of a quantity called information. The world is subdivided by boundaries differentially permeable to information. Information is just that kind of quantifiable element, unit, basis of unity, which allows universal translation, and so unhindered instrumental power, called effective communication. The biggest threat to such power is interruption of communication. Any system breakdown is a function of stress. The fundamentals of this technology can be condensed into the metaphor C3I: command, control, communication, intelligence, the military symbol for its operations theory. In modern biologies, the translation of the world into a problem in coding can be illustrated by molecular genetics, ecology, sociobiological evolutionary theory, and immunobiology. The organism has been translated into problems of genetic coding and read out. Biotechnology, a writing technology, informs research broadly. In a sense, organisms have ceased to exist as objects of knowledge, giving way to biotic components, i.e., special kinds of information processing devices. The analogous moves in ecology could be examined by probing the history and utility of the concept of the ecosystem. Immunobiology and associated medical practices are rich exemplars of the privilege of coding and recognition systems as objects of knowledge, as constructions of bodily reality for us. Biology is here a kind of cryptography. Research is necessarily a kind of intelligence activity. Ironies abound. A stressed system goes awry. Its communication processes break down. It fails to recognize the difference between self and other. Human babies with baboon hearts evoke national ethical perplexity. For animal rights activists, at least as much as for guardians of human purity. Gay men, Haitian immigrants, and intravenous drug users are the privileged victims of an awful immune system disease that marks, inscribes on the body, confusion of boundaries and moral pollution. But these excursions into communications, sciences, and biology have been at a rarefied level. There is a mundane, largely economic reality to support my claim that these sciences and technologies indicate fundamental transformations in the structure of the world for us. Communications technologies depend on electronics. Modern states, multinational corporations, military power, welfare state apparatuses, satellite systems, political processes, fabrication of our imaginations, labor control systems, medical constructions of our bodies, commercial pornography, the international division of labor, and religious evangelism depend intimately upon electronics. Microelectronics is the technical basis of simulacra, i.e. of copies without originals. Microelectronics mediates the translations of labor into robotics and word processing, sex into genetic engineering and reproductive technologies, and mind into artificial intelligence and decision procedures. The new biotechnologies concern more than human reproduction. Biology as a powerful engineering science for redesigning materials and processes has revolutionary implications for industry, perhaps most obvious today in areas of fermentation, agriculture, and energy. Communication sciences and biology are constructions of natural, technical objects of knowledge in which the difference between machine and organism is thoroughly blurred. Mind, body, and tool are on very intimate terms. The multinational material organization of the production and reproduction of daily life and the symbolic organization of the production and reproduction of culture and imagination seem equally implicated. The boundary-maintaining images of base and superstructure, public and private, or material and ideal never seemed more feeble. I have used Rachel Grossman's image of women in the integrated circuit to name the situation of women in a world so intimately restructured through the social relations of science and technology. I use the odd circumlocution, the social relations of science and technology, to indicate that we are not dealing with a technological determinism, but with a historical system depending upon structured relations among people. But the phrase should also indicate that science and technology provide fresh sources of power, that we need fresh sources of analysis and political action. Some of the rearrangements of race, sex, and class rooted in high-tech facilitated social relations can make socialist feminism more relevant to effective progressive politics.